Hey guys, today if you are willing to come with me, I am going to take you to space again, and this time we will travel by the mind to Venus and discover this planet. So all you have to do now is adopt a comfortable position, to use headsets, and just let me guide you in this trip to one of the planets that men have been knowing for the longest time. Because Venus can be easily seen from the Earth without any telescope, it has a distinctive bluish atmosphere that gives it its appearance, looking like a big star in the sky. And most civilizations knew it long before it was identified as a planet, and gave it a symbolic or sometimes religious meaning. The Romans associated this planet with the goddess of love and beauty, Venus, and in the Western world, the traditional meaning attached to this planet by astrologists, for example, is based on this association with the goddess of love. But in other times and in other parts of the world, like in the Americas before they were colonized, or in Asia, Venus has a completely different meaning. And as we are going to see, the conditions on its surface are so hostile that you can hardly consider it deserves to be associated with the goddess of love. In fact, the conditions we are going to discover in a moment are much worse for men than they are on Mars. I talked about it in a recent video. But first we need to travel to Venus, and it is going to be relatively short because we are traveling by the mind at the speed of light, and Venus is one of the closest planets to the Earth. Of course, it depends on what moment we choose, because both planets, the Earth and Venus, are revolving around the Sun, so sometimes they can be very close, sometimes they can be much farther from one another. But if we choose well the moment when the two planets and the Sun are aligned, the journey is going to last only a few dozens of seconds. As we are now coming closer to Venus, we can see that it has dimensions similar to our planet. It has almost exactly the same size, and like the Earth, Venus is a rock planet with an atmosphere around, but there are huge differences too. And the first difference is that Venus, being closer to the Sun, needs less time to make an entire revolution around the Sun. And as you know, a full revolution of the Earth around the Sun corresponds to 1 year and lasts about 365 days. But Venus has a shorter orbit and needs only 220 of our days to make a revolution, so that the Venusian year lasts about 2/3 of our years. But another difference too is that Venus is rotating much more slowly than the Earth on its axis, and this changes the length, the duration of the days too. And in fact, in one Venusian years, in 220 days, the planet makes only 2 full rotations, which means that the solar day on Venus lasts almost 4 of our months, with 2 months of what we would call a day with light from the sun, and 2 months of night. And after 2 days, the Venusian year is over and a new year begins. Being closer to the sun also means that Venus receives more energy, more light and heat than the Earth, but its atmosphere has a much higher density too, and prevents this energy from reaching the surface of the planet, so that most of this solar energy is lost, and the surface of Venus receives only half the energy from the sun that the surface of the Earth receives. So you could think that Venus would be a very cold planet, but in fact it is the opposite, because the very dense atmosphere also maintains this heat on the planet, and the greenhouse effect from this high density atmosphere makes the temperature reach levels that are unknown at the surface of the Earth. In fact, the average temperature is close to almost 500 degrees Celsius, which is more than twice the heat inside of a traditional oven that you could have in your kitchen. And this means that if our bodies were exposed to this heat, they would be immediately dried. They would not burn like on the Earth because there is no oxygen in the atmosphere of Venus. But clearly, this extremely high temperature is even tougher than the intense cold I talked about when describing the surface of Mars. But even worse than the temperature, the pressure on the surface of Venus defies our imagination too, because this dense atmosphere that I described has a pressure that is 90 times higher than on the surface of the Earth. And such a high pressure is equivalent to being more than half a mile under the surface of the ocean on our planet. This is a level of pressure at which all conventional submarines are instantly crushed, and no human body could resist such a pressure. And this pressure also means that it is impossible to find liquid water on Mars. It would be immediately turned into gas, steam, by the heat, and the intense pressure would maintain it in a state of fluid somewhere between a gas and a liquid floating above the surface. This atmosphere, which is extremely dense and heavy, is mainly made of carbon dioxide that we know under the form of a gas on the Earth. But given the pressure on Venus too, the carbon dioxide cannot maintain a state of gas and is also almost fluid, somewhere between gas and liquid due to the pressure. So as you see, no form of life as we imagine it or as we know it on the Earth could really evolve and develop on the surface of Venus. And since the 1950s and the 1960s, when American and Soviet space probes were sent to Venus, we know that no form of life, or at least life as we define it, can live, can exist on the surface of Venus. And given this extreme conditions, given the absence of water too. It looks impossible, even in the long term, to imagine that Venus could be habitable one day. And in the video about Mars, I told you that any colonization of Mars, any attempt to terraform this planet would have to be a very long-term project and something that clearly the next few generations won't see. In the case of Venus, it is almost unthinkable, at least in the current state of our knowledge and of the fictional projections we can make. So now we can slowly come back to our planet and return to much more pleasant conditions. And as usual, I hope that you enjoyed this journey, that you found it